So what I talk about is the physics of life, as you know from our past discussion.
It's this craziness. Dr. Bob, this is the Master E podcast. We're visiting in Vermont with Dr. Bob in his lovely home.
Chaotic home.
See,
the basis of Ilya Prigogine got the Nobel Prize in 1977. He created a field of physics called far from equilibrium thermodynamics. And in that field, flowing energy organizes matter and creates things that from a conventional perspective would be impossible because they'd be too statistically improbable. Like, for example, life. You know, the conventional view is somehow magically DNA accidentally formed over time. Mm-hmm. And accidental mutations have created the evolution of everything, including humanity. Well, unfortunately, or actually fortunately, that's nonsense. Because flowing energy has a creative nature and it forces changes that allow for increased complexity, such as seen in the human brain. And it turns out that vertebrates first evolved the CB1 receptor. And unlike all the bullshit that the experts in the scientific community talk about, which is all nonsense. I mean, it's true, but it's meaningless because it's all about regulating energy flow and the balance between carbohydrate metabolism, which makes energy efficiently and has allowed for the evolution of the human brain. So CB1 regulates the electron transport system. It's not only on the membrane of cells, it's on the mitochondria, the powerhouses that generate the ATP efficiently. But that's also where the free radicals come from. And free radicals basically react with everything. So they change your DNA, RNA, proteins, but the key thing is they change the biochemical flow, the harmony, the psychedelic biochemistry that is life's constant adaptability. Every instant we're adapting. We're taking in information via our nervous system, and we're taking in matter that's monitored by our immune system. So those two things monitor the flow that creates us. We are a flow-dependent structure. And from the Prigoginian point of view, that flow-creating organization is what creates life and creates evolution. It's not an accident. It's directed to where the need is, as evidenced by the free radical production. And as we've mentioned, and I'll mention again because it's very significant to understand all of this, is because free radical damages can cause cancer and cause basically aging and all age-related illnesses. But it's not the accumulation of damages in the conventional sense. It's the accumulation of damages, free radical damages, that disrupt the integrity of the flow and bring it closer to equilibrium. Health is distance from equilibrium. Return to equilibrium is aging. A far from equilibrium phase change to a lower level is death. So what we want to do is maintain our distance from equilibrium and do that in a functional way that makes us healthier, meaning stronger and smarter. And we do that by eating right and by exercising and by thinking right, and critically by consuming cannabinoids. So the evidence for the significance of cannabinoids and their evolutionary importance is that psychoactive cannabinoids are found in mother's milk. So women are basically cannabis delivery vessels so that the newborn can get what it needs to stimulate its appetite, to relax, to adapt to the oxygen environment so it doesn't make too many free radicals and damage itself. All of that's controlled by mother's milk. That's why you see these happy little fat-cheeked babies sleeping when they're fed mother's milk, because you're basically getting them stoned. Starting them off properly. And then we have these idiot governments of the world that don't understand how life works, guided by scientists who don't understand how life works, and doctors. They are nothing more than, for the most part, functional as this is my job. My job is to dispense these pharmaceutical pills that have no scientific foundation based on FDA studies that are stupid to begin with. I mean, why would you try to get a magic compound and a magic dose?
Keep talking.
That is going to work for everybody. Everybody's different.
The pot doc, Dr. Bob Melamede.
Hello.
Dr. Bob Melamede. The pot doc, Dr. Bob Melamede.
We are all pot people because without our endocannabinoid system, we wouldn't be here because our brain couldn't function efficiently enough to maintain the organization that characterizes humanity.
Dr. Bob, there was something you spoke about off camera a few minutes ago, and I thought it ties it together. You said, I got some new shit, some crazy new shit. And you started talking about the DNA, RNA replication, the intelligence was something that was brought up, a word that was brought up, but the seeming intelligence, or the what you witness as a scientist that you can only name as intelligence.
Well, I'll give an example of
Can you talk about for the first time? Yeah, give an example.
I'll give an example of how flow creates organization. Impossible organization. Very simple example that everybody's aware of and yet haven't thought about it for the most part appropriately. You take a bath and you pull the plug, and as gravity drains that water, what happens eventually? It forms a whirlpool. Mm-hmm. Why? Because that whirlpool is dissipating the gravitational potential more rapidly by forming an organized flow-dependent structure. As soon as the gravity is gone, then the flow goes away. You don't form that structure unless there's flow. All right? Well, that's an example of a physical flow-dependent structure. Life is a flow-dependent structure that's generated by flowing redox energy. In other words, we take hydrocarbons, like gasoline or oil, but we take it in the form of carbohydrates and proteins and food. Yeah. And we break that down and we pull that energy out to maintain the flow of life.
Yeah.
So we see that this physical example of the whirlpool, that could not happen from a statistical point of view, because you're having zillions and trillions of molecules that all of a sudden decide, hey, let's work together because we can get rid of this gravitational potential more rapidly. Or let's take the food and eat it and burn it so that we can maintain our flow-dependent structure, us, our life. But it's beyond us and our life. It's our physical environment that we create. We affect our environment. We've created the pollution, as well as the organized structure of our society.
Sure did.
And if they're not balanced correctly, society decays.
Yes.
It's the same in us. If we don't balance fixing with damaging, then we get screwed. We age, okay? Yes. And we get all the age-related illnesses because they're all caused by free radicals, caused by an imbalance in the electron transport system that caused by us eating too many carbohydrates and not consuming enough cannabis. Yes. Because high doses of cannabis turn on the CB2 receptor. See, the CB1 receptor and the CB2 receptor do exactly opposite things. Okay. CB1 regulates efficient energy burning so you can make a brain. On the other hand, CB2 turns that off and turns on cellular recycling.
It didn't make sense, and part of that not making sense was you're taking the concepts and still forming the distillation of it.
Well, now though it's pretty well distilled, because now I feel that quite fortunately and uniquely I understand the physics of life, so I can trace the origins of life, the evolution of life, as well as how things like cancers develop, which is a very interesting story that embraces really this whole concept of flowing energy, creating organization, and a balance between sugar burning for differentiated functions and fat burning, basically to repair the problems that were created when you were making energy efficiently by burning carbohydrates. So you need that balance so that the system, us, collection of molecules, can maintain a state of health, which is basically our distance from equilibrium.
So the cancer story...
Yeah, the cancer story figures into this in a very interesting way, because it turns out that in order for cells to protect themselves from their efficient energy production via the electron transport system, what the CB1 receptor does is it regulates things like calcium channels. So it regulates the activity of the mitochondria, because everything in our bodies, our nervous system, our muscle contraction, is always activated by calcium. So what we can do is we can withdraw calcium and put it in our bones, or we can release calcium and use it to activate things. And when we put it in our bones is when we burn fat and when we turn on the recycling, which is why it's important for women once they reach menopause and lose their estrogen, which turns on fat burning, to fix themselves. They have to now do other things dietarily to turn on fat burning to compensate. Otherwise, they'll lose their bones, and they'll become more susceptible to cognitive dysfunction and heart disease and all the stuff that males are normally, more susceptible to, because we don't make the estrogen in a sufficient level to give us the protection. So it turns out that because free radicals damage DNA and cause these aging problems, what we need to do is regulate that. And we regulate it in the differentiated mode by antioxidants, and vitamin C and D and E and all of these things. But we actually turn on the fat burning mode to really resurrect things. And it turns out that our CB2 receptor does that. So our brain is full of CB1 because we need efficient energy to power the brain. Efficient energy, okay? But it's dangerous energy because if you get a head injury, then those damages explode, free radicals, which then cause nerve death, all right? So you want to be able to turn on fat burning, and your cells do that in your brain because they can burn ketones instead of sugar. And they go back and forth to protect and by recycling. And it turns out that when a cell is replicating its DNA, when it goes into what's called S phase of the cell cycle, there are different biochemical characteristics, all right? G0, the cell is doing whatever it's doing, or doing nothing. But if it's going to differentiate and to turn into something, it's got to up its energy production, that's G1. And then when there's enough energy, if the cell's going to divide, it then will go into S phase. But when it goes into S phase, what it does is it turns off the electron transport system, because it can't afford to make all those damages when the DNA is naked, replicated.
That makes sense.
All right? So it turns on an inefficient process known as aerobic glycolysis, which also goes by the name Warburg, the Warburg effect, because Otto Warburg in 1928 discovered that cancer cells are very acidic and that they like sugar. Well, why do they like sugar? Because they're burning sugar inefficiently in order to protect themselves from making too many free radicals if they burned it efficiently. So you have this fundamental reality going on, and then, of course, the CB2 receptor can turn on the fat burning, which will then recycle the damaged pieces so that they can resurrect, which is also very interesting because stem cells, the fully totipotent stem cells, actually burn fat. That's why they don't age. They sit there doing nothing, waiting for signals that say, come here and help us fix things. So they go to where the damages are occurring, where excess, as indicated by excess free radical production, and then they either amplify by symmetrical division to make more stem cells, which occurs by fat burning, or they turn on via CB1 differentiation, so they can become nerve cells or muscle cells, etc. So you have this balance, and if everything is good, you minimize aging. I'm 71 years old. I've been practicing this for a long time, and I can tell you that I've been able to reverse things, and we do that with other people. That's how we reverse cancer, for example, because when you take, so where I was going with this is that what happens when you take chemo or radiation, a tumor is going to be composed of cells in all different phases of the cell cycle. And normally cells die via apoptosis, in which case they basically unwind their organization and bleb off into little membrane-bound things that can be eaten up by your phagocytic cells from your immune system. However, what happens in these cancer cells, when you come with chemo, is the cells that cannot amplify their damages to create apoptosis will survive, okay? Well, which cells are those? Those are the cells that are in S phase that have turned off the electron transport system and are now burning sugar via aerobic glycolysis. Well, the problem with that is that when you come in with chemo, you're going to kill all of the cells except for the ones in S phase, because they can't amplify the damages you're creating. So what I'm telling you is that chemo will select for drug-resistant cancers. Chemo is what kills people. because it selects for the resistance that kills people.
Yeah.
Those resistant cells are multi-fueled vehicles that can burn fat, they can burn carbohydrates, they go back and forth without killing themselves.
Yes.
So hence, they kill you.
Yes.
So cannabis via the CB2 receptor in high doses, very high doses, will disrupt the cell's harmony, which is already compensated for excess free radicals by turning on sugar burning. And when you force them into fat burning, if you're dealing with a virgin cancer that hasn't been chemoed, it can't make the adjustment to fat burning and it dies. And that's how all of the historical plant medicines that have been used for cancer or diabetes, that's how they work. They turn on fat burning. It's very simple. You look, whether it's Sanskrit medicine, Chinese medicine, no matter what ancient medicine, every single herbal preparation used for cancer or diabetes and also cognitive dysfunction, all of these things turn on fat burning to reduce free radical production and to increase cellular recycling.
Watch your elbow on the table. It's rocking the camera.
Okay. So that's the story here. We can reverse illnesses by reversing our biochemical flow. We have to demand